Just listened to the other debate here on the floor and was reminded of the fact that just earlier this month, our friends on the other side of the aisle introduced a resolution calling on the federal government to adopt what they call the Green New Deal. Now, from my point of view, the legislation is pretty far outside the mainstream, and what it's proposing and how it's proposing the problems that we should be debating, I don't have any problem with that, should be solved. And even though it seems pretty far outside the mainstream of thought, at least 12 of our colleagues in the Senate have co-sponsored it. The majority leader thought it'd be fair if you have that idea out there, and it's getting a lot of public attention, to have a chance to debate this legislation and to vote on it in the Senate. The Democrats have called that a sham. They've said, why should we have a debate on this piece of legislation? Why would we want to vote on this piece of legislation? Now, it's not co-sponsored by a majority of the members of the Senate, Mr. President, but it is co-sponsored by over 25% of the Democrats in the Senate. And you would think if 25% of their conference is sponsoring a bill that they'd be glad to come to the floor and talk about that bill and talk about it, what it does. So let's talk for just a couple of minutes about what that bill actually says. One of the things it does, it calls for the United States to use 100% renewable energy by 2030. That's just a little more than 10 years ago, and says basically that we'd want to have a zero carbon dioxide emissions by then. I know there was some discussion in the rolling out of this bill that would mean that ground transportation and air transportation would either be eliminated or minimized, at least the way we travel right now would be. And at some point in the future that may happen, but it's highly unlikely that it's going to happen in the next 10 years that the bill calls for. Maybe that's why they don't want to debate it. Even President Obama's former science advisor says that this is not feasible. Harvard University professor John Holdren was quoted in the New York Times saying, quote, "As a technologist studying this problem for 50 years, I don't think we can do it," end quote. So that's a pretty good source that indicates what we're talking about here can't happen. So that big headline goal appears to be impossible, but we probably could debate it anyway. Let's hear the other side, particularly the 12 co-sponsors, say why it is possible, why we should be able to do that, why that's in the legislation that they've filed. The rest of the legislation goes really beyond things that don't relate to the environment. There's a laundry list of policies that appear to be popular right now, and in the so-called progressive discussion. One is a single-payer health system, and the other is a federal job guarantee. The talking points suggested that that would be a federal job guarantee for people who can't work or aren't willing to work. Of course, that second was so controversial that immediately people began to say, well, maybe that was something that the Republicans snuck into our talking points, but turned out that wasn't true. There's a provision calling for, quote, repairing the historic oppression of youth. And that's sort of what this whole Green New Deal seems to focus on, accepting responsibility in a debate for things that really don't make the kind of sense you'd want them to make as you move toward legislation. Don't really say what the historic oppression of youth was. Probably that's not related to the economy or the environment or the greenness of the Green New Deal. But even if we agree that these ideas are good ideas, the other question is how much is it going to cost? The American Action Forum looked at the biggest parts of the legislation, and they estimated that the total would run anywhere from $51 trillion to $94 trillion over 10 years. Put this in perspective, the Congress right now appropriates about $1.5 trillion a year. We spend more than that through programs that are in place like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, but we appropriate, Mr. President, $1.5 trillion a year. If the estimates of the Green New Deal are right, that would suddenly become $5 trillion a year to $9 trillion a year. That's a pretty good multiplier of $1.5 million a year, 6 times, in fact, what we're spending now at the $9 trillion level. That works out to about $65,000 per family per year. That would probably be more government than we could afford, but that's how it works out. There's nothing that talks about how families are supposed to come up with their share of the bill. While some of the ideas in the Green New Deal or Medicare for all or a job for everybody guaranteed by the government sounds like a good idea, I don't think they're going to stand the test of the debate. I think that's one of the reasons that maybe the other side doesn't want to have the debate. Some talk, well, maybe we'll all vote present or we'll not vote at all. I think that's pretty hard to defend what you're out there talking about when you're not willing to come to the floor and talk about it. That's a debate we are going to have. I suspect we're going to have it sometime this month and look forward to engaging in that debate.